Hey, Detoxers. Welcome to a special episode of the Disinfo Detox. Today, I am joined by Wynn Tranfield, STEM librarian at University of California, Santa Cruz. Wynn, thank you for returning to the Disinfo Detox.
Yeah, of course. Morning.
Morning. I appreciate you coming on the show. We try and sift through what's true and false on this show, and there's been so much news about science and debates about science. And, when I do this work, I can say there's kind of three areas where I get the most flack whenever I touch Israel, January 6th, or RFK Jr. So I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah.
Um, so I get the reason, one of the first reasons I wanted to have you on is proponents of the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA agenda, are pretty outraged over something that happened recently. The Trump administration cut a deal with the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer. And basically, what it was trying to do was to lower costs here at home for Pfizer while giving them some kickbacks on tariffs in exchange. But I think one of the things I wanted to ask you kind of about is one of the big things on this that we get, reason why a lot of people disregard scientific studies is they think that big pharma has too much influence over the science, and as a result, its money dictates the conclusions. So, I wonder, as someone who works in the library side of things, how often do you get that kind of pushback? Maybe where you recommend a study or you talk about where the studies are at. How often do you hear kind of pushback about this idea about how big pharma is dictating the studies?
I actually don't hear that a lot. We talk about conflict of interest a lot and how researchers really ought to be upfront about their conflict of interest. And that doesn't always happen. So we talk about it both ways, where it's important to not just look at the study, but look at the researchers behind the studies as well. One of the um, one of the examples I like to use in class was the Monsanto papers. I don't know if you're familiar with those. So, uh, Monsanto, giant chemical conglomerate, responsible for Roundup Ready and Roundup Ready corn, and glyphosate, which has been linked to cancer, known carcinogen. There was consensus in the scientific community that glyphosate led to cancer. However, leading up to a class action lawsuit with farmers and individuals against Monsanto regarding glyphosate, there was an explosion in scientific publishing, where there are 14, I believe, somewhere around a dozen articles that came out that said there was no link between glyphosate and cancer. And Monsanto was listed as a funder. And uh, eventually it was determined that that was actually scientific misconduct on the part of Monsanto funding all those studies to try and influence the narrative in science. So it can get really complicated. I haven't heard much about Pfizer this time around, but it's, a familiar story.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, and I think whether it's real or imagined, I think that the presence that outside money, that company, sorry, that's seeking profit, always is going to raise questions, whether
Yeah.
real or imagined. I want to get to. There's a couple of, I know some of the RFK fans out there are probably listening and saying, "Do I have anything nice to say?" We'll get to a couple of things I want to talk to in terms of, I think, successes on his part. But I want to drill down on a couple other things because he's painted this interesting history, and I want to ask you if you have any studies on this. He's making the claim, and these are his direct words, that America was healthier when his uncle was president, say 1960 to 1963, than they are today. Do you know
Mhm.
of any studies that confirm that, or any metrics that people are leaning toward, or can you give us any insight on such a claim?
Um, I think it's a bold claim. I don't think I'm qualified to say, true, false, lean either way. I would just encourage anyone who's looking into it to look into studies that might define health metrics and make sure that um, as many populations as possible are included in those health metrics. We do know that in the 60s, women, people of color were typically understudied. So ensuring that everyone is included in that umbrella would be important.
Okay, good point. And then let me get you another one that's closely related here. He was asked, he being RFK Jr., about whether or not there had been any successes in the history of U.S. health agencies. This was just this previous Sunday. And he claimed that the infiltration of pharmaceutical companies has led to a series of bad decisions. And as a result, he said, quote, "I don't think there have been successes."
Oh, there have been tremendous successes.
Can you give us some, I mean, you don't need to do them all unless you have them on top of your head, but if you can
I
give us an
mean,
example or two.
yeah, I mean, it's controversial, but I mean, vaccines for one. Iodine in the salt is another great one.
Can we take the iodine in the salt? Why do you consider that a success?
As just noticed a problem, um, made some changes, and now it's something that we in this modern world no longer think about.
Okay, good. Can you explain? Can you break down the benefit there? What was the problem and how was it solved?
Yeah, so this is kind of off the cuff, so I don't know. I'm not going to remember dates. Um, uh,
That's all right. I teach history, so I always use that little cheat of like in the middle of the 20th century.
yeah. So mid 20th century. Folks who lived in the Midwest didn't have access to. Well, there was iodine deficiencies. It wasn't found in the soil. It wasn't found in the food. And one of the side effects of not having enough iodine is thyroid problems. So people were developing goiters, and you'd see people all over the Midwest with giant goiters on their neck. Public health concern. Um, so when the link between iodine and uh, these thyroid condition and the thyroid conditions was discovered, they're like, how can we get this into everyone's diets in a way that um, won't provide iodine toxicity, not too much iron, not too little. So um, Michigan was the first to add iodine to their salt, and now we still get iodized salt in the Midwest specifically. I mean, on the West Coast, it doesn't matter. We have iodine in other sources, but in the Midwest, it's still considered important.
Okay, and let's talk about the states because that was another thing I found. So, a Politico did a analysis of state legislatures, and they found that more than 130 pieces of legislation aimed at limiting access to ultra processed foods and improving nutrition, over 60 measures restricting the use of pesticides and other chemicals, and more than 130 measures expanding vaccine exemptions or prohibiting mandates were introduced this year.
Mhm.
Those are all really representative of, at least rhetorically, what the MAHA agenda claims to do.
Mhm.
Lawmakers also introduced dozens of bills to promote the use of psychedelics, authorize sales of raw milk, and the anti-parasitic drug ivermectin, and a ban on the fluoride in drinking water. These types of measures have increased by about 45% this year.
Yeah.
By all accounts from the surveys and polls, they seem to have bipartisan appeal.
Mhm.
When you hear that list of things, I think there's a lot of supporters of MAHA who say what's not to like. So I don't know. What do you think about any or all of these?
Well, I mean, it sounds like they've been busy, and I really wonder about the externalities. Combating pesticide use, it's not like farmers love to use pesticides for funsies. Um, so it depends on who they're targeting and how. I would also count fluoride in the water as one of the great public health successes of the 20th century, personally. Um, it's a little exhausting to keep track of everything, and the politicization of everything, but,
Yeah.
from an information lit perspective, I would say there's just an awful lot of information being thrown around and misinformation being thrown around and distractions. So I can understand why it's exhausting for, politicians and everybody else to keep track of these bills and their impacts.
Let me ask you one of them because I don't know this, so this is a question. But like ultra processed foods, I would assume is not a scientific term or category. So when they
Mhm.
say ultra processed foods, I mean, just what do you make of that framing of it?
I think it leaves a lot of space for bias and room for bias. Some ultra processed foods can be considered healthy. I mean, I have questions about what they're targeting with ultra processed because like it isn't um as far as I know, there's no official definition of ultra processed or what's that.
Yeah, this is actually this kind of gets to one of my kind of big critiques of the not MAHA movement, but RFK Jr. in particular.
Mhm.
He often conflates legal standards with scientific standards. So he'll say things like, "I was able to prove in court X, Y, and Z," and it's like, no, you were able to convince 12 jurors that was true. You weren't able to prove it in court. I mean, Johnny Cochran was able to convince 12 jurors OJ was innocent. Uh,
Mhm.
I know it's not too soon, but I think those kinds of things. I think a lot of the movement conflates that, but I do think there's one that he got that I think public opinion will be on his side. But you tell me. Um, RFK Jr. Has now said that they are actively planning to phase out animal testing. Um, can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about how important animal testing is to the scientific community in 2025, and what do you anticipate are going to be kind of the outcomes of that?
Animal testing is actually vital to our um, understanding of health, the human body, and the development of safe medicine for humans. It's not done carelessly, typically. I mean, there are always fringe cases where there's abuse in the labs, but in most universities, at least, it's very, very highly regulated. And um, any lab or researcher that needs or decides that they need to test on animals has to go through um, an IACOC application, and I always forget what IACOC stands for.
Yeah, and you're speaking to the
Yeah,
science of it on the politics of it. I always think everyone is intuitively tends to be, or I guess most people tend to be against animal testing. I remember during the pandemic when the left
mhm.
was really defending Fauci and the right was attacking Fauci. The only time I thought Fauci was actually in polling trouble was when that report came out that he oversaw the study with the dogs, I think, where they reportedly had to cut their
Yeah,
throats to stop barking with the sand. So I think politically, I think this may play well, but I hear your
yeah.
point.
I think politically
Science
it
of it.
might play well, but any researcher that wants to engage in animal research has to do an IACOC protocol, which is an institutional animal care and use committee protocol, and that involves a really extensive literature search where they have to prove that they are using, I guess, for lack of a better term, like the lowest um, sentience for their study. So if the study is like in very or if the medicine is like in very early trials, early stages, they're going to be using, mice or rats. And, by the time it would get to like a chimp or a dog, that medicine has gone through rigorous testing, or it's been, argued that it wouldn't be suitable to test on a lower sentience because they wouldn't get the effects that they needed. It's different in industry. Sometimes they don't have to do that IACUC testing, but at least in universities and labs, they're very strict about minimizing harm to animals as much as possible. And I agree. I think this is going to play well with the public, but people learn a great deal from being able to, experiment on other live animals before it gets to humans. So, I mean, I wonder what the alternatives are. We don't have an alternative yet for animals.
Okay. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about, because it was big news a week or two ago, but the White House and the federal government now is officially recommending that pregnant women do not take Tylenol, claiming that there's this link between Tylenol and autism. As my understanding is, this has been a long rumored link. There was apparently
Mhm,
someone at Harvard who concluded this, but apparently he had taken $150,000 to represent a competitor of Tylenol. So there's some questions about conflict of interest.
mhm,
You don't have to get into all that. I know there's legal, political, and scientific implications of what I just said in public health, but any
mhm.
of that you want to speak to about what did you make of kind of this the Trump administration telling pregnant women not to take Tylenol?
Yeah, my first um, my first question was whose voices are missing from this conversation, and I looked at the Autism Society of America to see what their response was, the American Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology to hear what their take was, and they both conflicted with the government's proclamation. And it's my understanding that the recommendations have always been to take as little as possible, at the lowest dose possible when you need it. And there are many other risks at play. People are asking if not why, like if Tylenol causes autism, not, or like if taking it will cause autism, not why would a pregnant person take Tylenol? And a lot of those risks associated, like a febrile patient, is associated with other risks. And there are more than 20,000 articles on PubMed that discuss possible causes of autism. So, in some ways, it feels like a little bit of uh, a hyperfixation on one thing that could possibly be controlled. And I really worry about the the prevalence of this type of information just on the web in general as more people turn to ChatGPT and large language models to answer their questions. With traditional search engines, uh, the usually the most authoritative sources float to the top for people to find and evaluate on their own. But in the large language model, they're looking at patterns online and what is seen most frequently. And if we get a lot of slop in the trough and in the scrape, I'm concerned about more and more people turning to ChatGPT for health advice and information and not looking at more authoritative sources. And bringing these controversial um, takes to the national and global stage, um, without really pulling in all of the impacted voices, I am concerned about those ramifications. So,
All right. Well, Wynn, we love having you on the show. I can throw anything at you, and you always have an answer for me, and I appreciate that. Can you remind folks where they can follow your work?
um, sure. Well, I'm a librarian, so talk to your librarian. I have a website um, where you can read takes on large language models or information literacy in general, and
Is that at the UC Santa Cruz website or your personal website?
personal website,
Oh, give us the address. What is it?
wyntranfield.com.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Wynn Tranfield, thank you so much for being on the Disinfo Detox.
Yeah, my pleasure. Take care.
All right. Thank you, Detoxers. We'll see you next time.